So I am Ryan Aversa, and I am here with Udit Roy, a sophomore biology major. Um, and I'm here to ask him a couple questions revolving around my 8A hypothesis test. So my hypothesis revolves around the implementation of non-lethal weapon practice into all jobs within law enforcement and jobs alike. This is definitely a big issue in our current times, so it's definitely good to get a lot of different feedback from a lot of different people. So, Udit, do you think that it's correct for law enforcement to go into a non-lethal situation and have lethal weapons on them?
I do agree with the fact that the use of a non-lethal weapon by law enforcement in a setting that didn't have any lethal weapons itself is definitely not a fair way to go
A
about
little
it.
bit much. It's definitely a little bit much. Okay, yeah. There's been a lot of issues recently of like, oh, why was a gun even drawn in that scenario, or this and that. Why did firing come out? So that's definitely something that has been argued a lot. So sticking to the lethal aspect, do you think maybe all that needs to happen is just more training around the weapons?
I feel the cops definitely are well trained in handling and using of the gun. You know, they go through quite a bit of training. I haven't necessarily witnessed any firsthand experience, but the little bit I know, I think the cops go through a good bit of training. I think maybe there's more a need for training in recognizing certain situations and being able to quickly decide whether or not a lethal weapon should even be used.
It's a lot more of like a mental psychological kind of thing. Okay, I can definitely get behind that. So sticking to now a non-lethal movement, do you think there are more benefits to non-lethal weapons?
I guess, like purely objectively, sure. I guess the use of non-lethal weapons would decrease, I guess, violence within these
Yeah.
situations. But at the same time, I
Being
think
more
it's
realistic.
being more realistic. It's fair to assume that law officers, police officers, they're taking tremendous risks with the jobs that they do, and a lot of times they're going into areas and situations that most people run away from, and so them having a lethal weapon, being armed with a lethal weapon doesn't necessarily mean that they're gonna use that lethal weapon every time, but it's definitely no reason to take away the lethal weapon from the
Okay.
police officers.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree with that. So can you see the public as a whole getting behind a non-lethal weapon movement?
I think so. I think, given a lot of the news headlines and just general way the news has been shown these last couple of days, I could definitely see the majority of the public getting behind a non-lethal movement.
Okay. Okay. Do you do you think we would see a difference in how the public views law enforcement? Like, say you see a cop and you know he doesn't have a lethal weapon, are you going to view him differently?
I definitely think so. I think a lot of the times people that are approached by a police officer do get very intimidating because they see that gun very present on the police officer.
Yeah, it's right
So
there.
I think in that aspect, when people see a police officer now that doesn't have a gun, they're more welcome to, I guess, the help. They see the police officer trying to help them more rather than see the police officer as someone who's bothering them or getting in their way.
Nice. All right, but to play devil's advocate on that, would you still feel safe knowing that law enforcement are all over your streets and they don't have lethal weapons?
I see what you're saying. I definitely think, I guess a good way to handle it would be maybe certain, given understanding the areas that these officers are working in. Certain areas are more prone to the use of lethal weapons and violence stemming from lethal weapons,
Okay.
and certain areas don't. So I don't think every police officer needs to always be armed with the weapon, but a lot of times they could have it readily available in the car, let's say the glove compartment, things
Okay.
like that.
Okay. So that's standing more on like the contingency viewpoint again, where you're looking at the scenario as a whole, and you want to see, oh, okay, this scenario definitely doesn't need a lethal weapon. So I can definitely get behind that as well. Do you think not having lethal weapons would hurt law enforcement careers? Like, how would that affect a police officer? Would you see people wanting to still go into the practice?
I feel there would be I think there would be a drop off in how many people apply or even think about becoming a police officer if they know that they're not going to get a gun. Again, knowing from the fact that these police officers, these cops are doing a job that a lot of us would never want to do. In that
it becomes a whole different career after that.
Especially, yeah. And so I definitely see a lot less people going.
Okay. So let's say theoretically a non-lethal movement becomes widespread and a lot of support is brought around it. Do you see the public begin to move away from carrying lethal weapons and start carrying non-lethal weapons?
The public, I guess, yeah. I think if the non-lethal movement were to take over, happen like that, then I definitely see the public shifting more towards non-lethal weapons. But I guess they wouldn't ever see a case in which lethal weapons were used, and in that sense, they would never feel the need to have a lethal weapon.
Yeah,
What they're seeing is people handling these situations without lethal weapons.
Yes.
So, and there's no need to up the ante anymore.
So do you still think violence would be a very prevalent issue, or do you think maybe somehow people would begin to realize what's going on and kind of change ways, or do you think it's just going to be an ever prevalent issue?
Violence, I guess, would continue to be an issue. It would just be a lot less non-lethal, obviously, but I don't see the rate of violent crimes going down. I guess
Going down,
just
yeah.
the damage and the overall effect of that violent crime would go down with the diminishing of non-lethal or lethal weapons.
Okay, yeah. I mean, it's definitely, violence is always going to be a prevalent issue, and it's just like how we go about stopping it.
Mm-hmm.
But with the move towards non-lethal weapons, a significant amount of funds would be saved. I mean, lethal weapons are very expensive. Assault rifles, handguns, all that. They take up a lot of budgeting. Do you think the funds that would be saved could be used in any other ways to benefit law enforcement, like maybe a training program or anything like that?
Yeah, I think I feel like a lot of police officers, when they don't have a gun anymore, I guess they lose a sense of authority and a sense of handling on the situation. So I think you could use the money saved from not buying all these guns and rifles and investing in, I guess, what we were talking about earlier, the more psychological approach of training.
Yeah, just the mental.
Mm-hmm. And use it, and you could, I guess, hire actors, and you could go through scenario by scenario of things these police officers will more than likely see, and have them have that experience, rather than when you're first time presented with a very difficult situation and you have a gun on your side, it's very easy to just reach for that gun and handle the situation in that sense, in that way.
Yeah, that's why, law enforcement is almost like a hierarchy. Like, you see the guys who have the most experience at the top because, they've seen it all. They know what's going to happen in scenarios. So that's definitely a good point to make. Finally, talking about non-lethal weapons, do you have any suggestions for something other than, just your normal taser? Maybe a different type of ballistic or something like that would still have a serious amount of effectiveness on violence?
I think tasers as well have their place. In certain situations, you definitely need to take control. As violent as that does sound,
yeah,
you do need to take control of the situation. A lot of times, the criminal they're dealing with does need to be, stopped, controlled. And so I think tasers and ballistics definitely have their place. I'm sorry, what was the question?
Do you think, implementing a new ballistic that maybe paralyzed someone or just completely stopped them in their tracks, do you think that would be a more effective thing than an actual lethal bullet?
I think so. Yes, because it still has that seriousness to it, and in that sense, the officers will still have that sense of control, but they won't have the long-term effects and damages that could stem from actual lethal weapons.
All right. Well, thank you very much, man.